One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. We are covering a topic today that makes a lot of podcasters uncomfortable. Now, I'm not going to say that every podcaster is uncomfortable with selling on their podcast, but if you don't know where to even get started, I think that this is one of those ideas that just kind of freaks people out. They're like, what do you mean I can sell to people on my podcast? Don't I have to have a brand sponsor, and don't they have to just tell me what to do? No, absolutely not. I sell on my podcast all the time, but there is just a certain way that I believe you can approach it and do it in the right way. And I also think that we just need to talk about selling on your podcast anyway. I get this question a lot, like, how do you feel about people selling on a podcast? And I don't mind. I really don't. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. So we are going to talk about what products or services I specifically sell. Like, I'm going to give you examples because I know you're always up for a good example. We're going to talk about how you sell, but we're also going to talk about where to draw the line. When is it too much? So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Krystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? You can probably tell in my voice, I am super congested right now. I'm hopefully getting over a sickness. And I mean, it's just all in the nasal area. And I'm like, really? Like, when you talk for a living, when you podcast, it's like this congestion is not working for me. Like, I at least sound better than I did a few days ago. But oh my gosh, like, this is just killing me. I've been waiting to record this episode. I was like, okay, I'm going to feel better in a few days and then I'll be able to record it. And I'm just like, you know what? The show must go on. We're just going to record this. I may have a lot more stopping and pausing to cough or to take a drink of water during this episode. But this is a really important episode because I know that many of you listening want to sell your own products, or maybe you want to have a membership or a service that you offer to your listeners. And selling on a podcast is something that I believe people have pretty strong opinions about. Either people are all for it or people are like, oh my gosh, no, you don't sell on a podcast, which is just kind of weird to me, but we're going to get into all that. But that is the initial question that came up is, how do you feel about selling on your podcast? And first, I want to dive into, what do I sell? Like me, Profit Media, on this podcast, like what are the things that I sell? And if you're a longtime listener, you're like, well, I can tell you exactly what Krystal sells. I sell the digital courses, right? I have my own digital courses. I have the podcast toolkit. Like I have my own programs that I will cycle through. And we're going to talk about how I actually sell them in a second. But this is something that I sell on a regular basis, either by mentioning them or having actual launches and promotions around them. But that's one thing. Another thing is affiliate launches and partner promotions. Like we're in the middle of a campaign right now, and you've probably heard me talking about it. And these are things that I use my podcast, because it's part of my platform, to talk about the benefits of being a part of an affiliate launch or a partner promotion. And then another thing is the products and services that I endorse, right? I tell you all about Buzzsprout. I tell you all about StreamYard. Like these are products and services that I use on a regular basis. So I talk about them here on the podcast. So those are the things that I quote unquote sell, even though some of them are like affiliate commission type things. I'm not actually selling you a physical product. It could be a digital product or a service, but those are the things that I sell. Now, how do you feel about it? Right? This is the actual essence of the question. And I got to be really honest, I didn't know how to sell on my podcast when I first started playing around with things. So all the things that I'm sharing here with you today are from my own experience of trial and error and what has worked with my audience, my topic, my category, my industry. So it could be totally different for your audience, but I love giving you good examples and sharing with you the things that I've learned along the way. So my favorite way to sell on the podcast, and this has only been made available recently, like in the last year, it hasn't even been a full year yet, is dynamic content. If you're a Buzzsprout user, you have this feature already in your dashboard. Like you can actually just upload a audio file to the very beginning or the very end of your podcast, and that could be your own self-sponsored ad. I'm going to link to a few of my favorite resources I have about dynamic content. If you're like, Krystal, I don't know what that is, don't worry, I got you covered. I have lots of YouTube videos. I have some podcast episodes for you to check out. But the reason why I like this so much is because it's not difficult to do, and it can be applied immediately to all of your episodes. So when I sit down to create a piece of dynamic content, I'll record it, and it's usually less than a minute and a half because of the way I technical things on the back end. I just like to have my music playing in the background. And I know that the music that I have, in order to make it to where it's not too much editing on my part, I have to make it a certain length. So I will record the audio clip, put some music behind it, upload it into Buzzsprout, and then I can click a button and apply it to all of my podcast episodes. It's just my favorite. It works so stinking well. And I think that if there's one place that you can really experiment and try new things, if you're like, I just don't know if I want to say that in every episode, that's fine. Put it in your dynamic content and then you can swap it out and change it. And Buzzsprout has recently updated to where the dynamic content feature, where now you have like a back catalog and a library of all the dynamic content pieces that you've used. So I can see which ones I have played or how many times they've been played or downloaded, which is really, really cool. So I love dynamic content. It's my favorite way to sell on a podcast. Now, the second one is baked in ads within an episode. So this is what I used to do before dynamic content became a thing. And it's what you hear in a lot of other podcasts where if there's like a corporate sponsor, I always think of like BetterHelp. Like they have done an amazing job in securing a lot of really big name podcasts. Like I feel like, I know about the company because I've heard them from host read ads on so many different podcasts. But what will happen is typically the podcast will go to like a short break and you'll hear the host reading an ad that's all about the BetterHelp company or how the host has used it or how it's helped someone that they know. That is a baked in ad within an episode. But you can create those for yourself. Like this is what I did prior to dynamic content being an option. I do the same thing with the dynamic content, right? I record it, and then I would just have to do some more work on the editing. Like in the actual episode, I would have to drop in that audio clip within the episode that I had just recorded and then make sure everything flowed well. Like it was a little bit more finessing to the actual audio file, but it wasn't complicated. Like it wasn't this overly thing like, oh my gosh, it's so stressful to do it. It wasn't. It was totally fine. So I've done baked in ads, and that is totally a way to go about selling something within an episode. Another thing is just mentioning what you're selling. So here is a great example. At the very beginning of this, I talked about some things that I sell or, that I'm affiliated with. And I mentioned Buzzsprout and StreamYard. I didn't say anything like, oh my gosh, you have to buy or you have to sign up for Buzzsprout with my account. And you have to sign up for StreamYard using my affiliate link. I just mentioned it. And then what I would do is have a link in my show notes for you to go, take advantage of the free trial that is associated with my affiliate account, or tell you about another way that you can grab a special promotion that they're doing. So you don't have to be like overtly over the top when it comes to selling on your podcast. If a more natural fit works for you, where it doesn't feel like there's a break in what you're talking about on your podcast versus like having an actual ad spot within your show to sell something. These are just options. I'm just telling you all the things that I've done over the last few years to sell things on my podcast and what's worked for me. And ad mentions are just super easy. I could even say, if you want to give Buzzsprout a free try, you can go to krystalprofit.com/Buzzsprout. And here's another side note, podcast hack, if you want to call it that. But whenever you're creating URLs for your affiliates, make sure they are super easy to remember, because that's the only reason why I can say krystalprofit.com/Buzzsprout or /StreamYard. That's how I set those up, because I want them to be easy for me to remember, but also for you as my audience. So, and that I kind of blended in the last two together. So let me count these down again. So number 1, how do you sell on your podcast? Dynamic content. Number 2, baked in ads. Number 3, ad mentions. And number 4 is telling people to go to the show notes to learn more. And this is where, you know how if you go to someone's website, if they'll have like the Google AdSense, or, some people will have just different types of ad, whether it's Mediavine or Google Ads, whatever they're using to run ads on their website. Well, instead of doing that, I will put my own, like I have an affiliate ad for Buzzsprout on there. I also have an ad for my book, Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. That's always in my show notes. I just leave that there. It's just a recurring poster, like it's advertising. It's free advertising because it's my show and it's my show notes. So I can set them up however I want to. And I love the idea of promoting my own products and services and having control over that, as opposed to, trying to get Google AdSense or something else displaying on my website. Okay. And it's a lot cleaner and more uniform because it's all my brand colors anyway. All right. So we talked about, what do I sell? How do you sell? And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is, when is it too much? Because this is the question. People that are hesitant about selling on their podcast, they're like, when is it just, I don't want to bother my audience. When am I bothering my audience? And honestly, I think it's only too much if you aren't adding value to your audience. In other words, I know a good majority of listeners who will hear an ad on this podcast. You're not going to be offended. You're just going to be like, oh, that's not for me right now. And maybe you'll fast forward, or maybe you'll tune that out, and then you'll come back in and you'll be like, okay, I'm ready to hear what this episode was about. You're not offended by it. And I think that so many people are terrified to offend their audience. They're like, well, I came here to listen to this podcast, but oh my gosh, they mentioned something that they're selling. Yeah, if your podcast is part of a business, which most of you it is, then you are likely going to be selling. Do you have to sell in every episode? No. Do you have to sell in every other episode? No. Do you have to even put an ad in your podcast whatsoever? No, you surely don't. But I believe that when it becomes too much, I think this is almost like an irrational fear that people have, I'm bothering people. If I'm talking about my own products and services, I'm bothering them. But the truth is, the only way you're going to be bothering them is if you're not adding value. I don't come on here and tell you, okay, here's a great example. I get a lot of really bad pitches for collaborations. And this has just really been increasing a lot in the last 6 months. There's brand new startup companies that will reach out to me, and it's a hot mess, y'all. There's so many typos. It's just not a good fit for me professionally and personally. I'm just I wouldn't use this product. So it's not going to work. It's not going to work. But where it would be too much for my audience, if I said, oh, but this company is going to pay me, so I'm just going to push this to my audience knowing that it's not a good fit. Well, that's when it's going to be too much, because your longtime loyal listeners, they're going to know. They're going to know when you're not being authentic, when you're just phoning it in and you're just, reading an ad on a piece of paper because you're getting paid to do it. I'm sorry, I'm not about that. And I know that there's some people that they're totally fine. They're like, yeah, I'll take somebody's ad money all day. If they're going to pay me, I'll read their ad. That's not me. That's not me. It needs to be aligned with my podcast, my message, my audience, in order for me to feel good about it at the end of the day. So where it gets less appealing to the bigger, broader audience is when there's so much constantly happening, right? There's so many ads, there's so many mentions, there's too many calls to action, and there's just not a lot of relevancy to the audience and no added value to the listener. So that's when I think it's, quote, too much, is when you've lost sight of why you're mentioning something or why you're talking about a product or a service. If you can't answer that, then yeah, you may need to reevaluate and think about what are your goals with selling on your podcast and what does that look like for you? Now, I didn't actually write this down. I'm like going off the cuff here, going off script here, but people will ask me, well, how often can I sell something on my podcast? I say every episode, every single episode. And I believe that there is a limit to how many times you can say something on a podcast and then it just becomes white noise to the people that have heard it. So this is why I like dynamic content, because I can change it up. You won't hear the same piece of dynamic content on this podcast for more than probably 2 to 3 weeks. I don't like to leave it up any longer than that. And honestly, I think that that's still a long time, but that's because I have 2 episodes every single week. And so that's, if you're a regular listener, you listen every Tuesday, every Thursday, that's a long time for you to hear the same ad over and over and over again. But if you are just publishing 1 episode a week, you could put out a piece of dynamic content once a month. So that's like 12 opportunities for you to share, right? If we're thinking of a monthly basis over the course of a year, you could just have 12 things that you promote on your podcast and you just change it out every month. You're like, okay, 1 month, I'm going to sell my digital program. And then the next month, I'm going to talk about my favorite planner that I like to use. And I'm going to share my affiliate link. And then the next month, and then you just measure. You sit back and measure. And the reason why I'm sharing all this here with you today is because that's all I've done. Y'all, this is just me, trial and error, telling you what's worked, what hasn't worked, and letting you know that it's okay if you're afraid, like, I'm going to try this and it may not work. It might not. Anything that I shared here with you today may not work for you and your podcast, or it could blow your expectations out of the water, right? So I don't want you to be afraid to try something on your podcast. And if you're like, this feels icky, it didn't feel right, it felt forced, it didn't feel authentic, then don't do that again. Whatever that thing was that you tried that didn't feel true to you, true to your audience, don't do it again. But just because you try something one time to sell on your podcast and you're like, oh, this doesn't work. I tried dynamic content once. I left it up for 1 day and nothing happened. No, you got to give everything a proper chance to try it out, put it out there, and see how your audience responds to it. But that's all I have for y'all today. I hope you enjoyed this. I've really been wanting to talk about selling on your podcast. I think that it's something that, like I said, I had to learn by trial and error. And I'm going to link to a bunch of other important information about dynamic content and self-sponsored ads in the show notes. So krystalprofit.com/episode 289. And if you're listening to this in real time, I'm really excited because my friend and mentor, Amy Porterfield, she has this awesome brand new training coming up that is all about the 5 little known mistakes most course creators make and how to avoid them. So if you're thinking about selling a digital course and you're like, I don't even know how to go about that, I don't even know what that looks like, come join us in her free training because it's going to have so many awesome takeaways, especially if you're just getting started and you're like, I want to avoid all the mistakes that most people make. You definitely want to come to this training. So I'll have a link in the show notes. So again, krystalprofit.com/episode 289. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says send Krystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal, it could be totally anonymous, or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Krystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of fan mail shout outs.